Morning, church. We left Jonah last week, heading towards Tarshish. Remember Tarshish? There it is. That's where Jonah wanted to go. He was all planning on that, all set for that. Bought his ticket, got everything ready to go on the ship, sailing towards what he thought was Tarshish, and away from the darkness of Nineveh. Remember Nineveh, the Assyrian Empire? Yeah, that's from the palace in the Assyrian Empire, the gigantic. It was militaristic, dark, godless, heartless. That was Nineveh. So Jonah's real, happy. He's relaxed. He's feeling good. He's asleep in the ship, cruising along with a full breeze behind their backs, heading west. Go west, young prophet. Something always is good in the west, right? That's where we want to go, west. So, prepared for this journey, he was ready for the next step. Suddenly he looks around. There's a storm that comes. The sailors are all upset about everything, and at any rate, they cast Jonah overboard. So there's Jonah in the drink. In not very long, he is swallowed by the belly of a big fish or a whale, and that's where we find Jonah today. And the scripture says, "But the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah. And he was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." So the belly of the fish, what would it be like in the belly of a fish? So we had a children's message last night, and we set up a fish over there in the choir loft. You're sitting in the fish right there. The belly right there. We had a little blanket. It was like the kids going into their forts. Remember the forts we all made? Yeah, that's what that was. It was so. And Jen was asking them what they felt like in there. What was it like? It's dark. What would it be? It's wet, fishy, smelly, a little scary. Not sure what's going to happen. And so all of that was going on. But what we can also say is there was kind of emptiness. It was quiet, small, cut off, and alone. So I remember when I was a child, when I did something I shouldn't do, my parents would send me to my room. Go up to your room, close the door, and stay there until you figure this out. Until you've realized what you've done, and then come back downstairs and talk to us about that. Anybody ever been sent to their room? So we know what that's like, right? You feel a little guilty, you feel, a little sad because you don't get to do the things you have. I had a little Sony radio, this big, AM, was no FM. Little Sony radio, I didn't have that, didn't have my cassette player, all those things that you normally have. So you're just sitting there thinking about this. Today it would be no cell phone. No electronic devices. So we know this place, don't we? There's the cell phone going away, right? We know what this place is like. It's a mixture of guilt, self-assessment, not sure how long you're going to be there. You can't come right back downstairs, right? Got to give them a sense that you're working on this, thinking about it. Taking it seriously. So Jonah, there he is, 3 days and 3 nights. That's long enough, huh? In the belly of the fish. Something like going to his room and having to think about its mandatory time out. So the question, why did God do that? Why did God have Jonah swallowed by a whale or a big fish? Potential reasons, 3 potential reasons. Probably more, but here's 3 possible ones. Again, a good story always has more than one way to come at it, right? That's what we have with Jonah. So here's number 1, to punish Jonah. You might say, that's obvious. He was going the wrong way. God wanted him to go to Nineveh. He decided he was going to Tarshish. This is a punishment. We're taught, and it's ingrained deeply in us, that when we do something wrong, we're punished. That goes back a long ways for us. So whatever pain that comes along with it, that's it. That's part of what you need to deal with. That's part of what you get. When we mess up, we're held accountable. So the belly of the fish is God's judgment and accountability on Jonah's sin and hiding from God's face, going the wrong way, going away from God. This is what happens. We're punished when we don't do the right thing. But what I want to say today is God is not a punisher. God is not waiting for us to go off base, to do something wrong so that we're going to be punished. It's not how God is with us. It may feel like that. We may interpret it that way through our experience and how we've been trained and growing up, but God is really not about punishing us. God was in fact maybe helping Jonah by giving him the fish, saving Jonah by having him go in there. Maybe this was actually a help for Jonah. Not that he didn't do something wrong, not that he didn't sin. This is going to be a chance for Jonah to think about this. Okay, so one would be to punish Jonah. Two would be to test Jonah. We all have things that happen in our lives. We go, well, that was a test. Why is God testing me again? It seems like I'm in another test. These tests are too much for me. I'm sick of these tests. We all say these things. The belly of the fish was part of a test. So a word for test is gives it a little bit more of a nuance here. It would be crucible. So this is a crucible that God's created to test Jonah. So a crucible, the technical word or definition is a container made of a substance that can resist great heat. So how much heat can it resist? That's the testing part of it. We're going to be thrown into this place where we're heated up, right? And we'll see what happens to you. Arthur Miller wrote a play called The Crucible. There's a picture of it there. So a crucible is a test to reveal an individual's true character and provide an opportunity, potential, for the person to change. So the play is about the Salem witch trials, and the people involved, the characters, are all dealing with their part in it, what happened, and the crucible is we're kind of seeing them being tested, their character, to see what they're kind of made of, and that's what's happening in the play. Those of us who are reading it or watching it are getting this sense of what was inside of the people that were doing that. Even though at times in our lives feel like tests, and we say they're tests, God is not a tester. God is not about putting us in tests all the time, just to see whether we're going to come out, how we're going to come out, what we're going to be made of. That may be part of what's going on, but that's not what God is intending. God is not intending to see whether we're worthy enough to be whatever, to make it through or to pass the test. God is not grading us all the time. God is not doing that. I don't think God is primarily looking to test Jonah to see if he passes. So a third way of looking at this, right? If it's not a judgment and it's not a test, what is it? About this, to invite Jonah to think and act differently. This is the one I want to focus on today. Jonah's time in the big fish's belly served as an invitation to wrestle and to strive to do what God would have him do. It's a spiritual struggle that goes on in our hearts when we're looking to hear and respond to God's leading. It's like Jacob wrestling with the angel at night. Remember that story? Paul utilized this meaning when he likened his spiritual training to training like an athlete. So this is like the gym, for the spiritual gymnasium, the place of training for Jonah. It's like, here, I'm putting you in here, you're going to need to do some work. You're going to need to do something. Spiritual training is not the same as punishment or testing. Like an athlete in training, the time and space for wrestling provides the context for growing towards what it means to be the person that God has created us to be. Confinement happens in our lives. It's painful, but it's needed in order to move us ahead in our lives and in our relationships with God. It's not an item on the menu that we can take or leave. One thing, yes, I'll do the confinement part. It's actually the kitchen where everything else happens. The whole rest of the meal happens, It's an important place. It's a place we're going to find ourselves at some point. Probably most of us have already been there sometimes. In fact, every time we get sick, we don't go to work. It might be good that we're not at work, but anyway, we're home. We may not be feeling well. A lot of people are sick at this time. I know that, with flu and stuff. Even those times of confinement can be times for us to draw closer to God. We have more time to pray. We have more time to think, read, reflect. What is going on? What can I learn through even this little space, this shift in my regular routine? Confinement is a shift in your routine. Your daily grind, your rat race, whatever you call it. It's a time to think and act differently. Tagore said, "The towing rope binds a boat, but is the bondage its meaning? Does it not at the same time drive the boat forward?" Sickness or injury is a time for spiritual training. God awareness begins to replace self-absorption and self-focus. The first thing we think about is, why am I in this? Woe is me. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen. Whatever we want to say. Why is this going on in me? That's where we start. But we don't need to stay there. God awareness comes into play. So Apostle Paul, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, and dozens of others all represent the spiritual clarity that confinement can lead to something good for us. In this forgotten, lonely, cut off, solitary place, we find new appreciation for the gift of every day, for the grace of God in our lives, for the gifts that we're receiving, just because of God's grace and love. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect through weakness." So a pastor went off to see an old Hispanic carpenter who spent much of his life helping his neighbors build their houses. And because he did that, he never worked on his own house. So it was plywood floors and unfinished walls, all that kind of thing. And the pastor was going to see this man. He had AIDS. The social worker said that he'd probably die soon. And that he thought that the pastor might want to talk to him about his situation, let the man share his feelings, his anger, his pain about his impending death, and give him a chance to do that. So his first comment to the pastor was, "You're a minister, why don't you just pray with me?" So the pastor sat down on the man's bed and prayed with him. After the prayer, the pastor questioned him about his illness. "You want to talk about this? Why? What? What's going on? How you feel? Why do you think you have AIDS? Why were you given this illness?" He thought about the pastor's questions. He turned slowly and he said, "So I could have more time to think about Jesus." Sometimes you wonder who's pastoring who, right? Who's ministering to who? The man was dying and in great pain, yet he was listening for a deeper healing, for the love and faith and grace that would fill his heart and help him through this, even on his way home, even on this last journey. Jesus taught about this. He taught about our confinement. He taught that confinement is not a punishment, nor is it a test. He taught that pain is part of what happens in life. When people asked him why a man was born blind, why is this man born blind? Who sinned, this man or his parents? Who's to blame? Tell us, Jesus. Jesus says, neither the man nor his parents, but that the works of God might be seen through him. God can do something through this. God can bring about something here that we haven't seen, that we haven't known. He told his followers not to look for why the suffering came, to push ourselves down, to feel guilty. Maybe we've done something, we've sinned, somebody's sinned, or somebody else. We're a victim. We're wounded. Somebody else has done this to me. Didn't want us to spend our time. We naturally go to those places. Don't feel guilty about going to guilt. But we don't need to stay there. We miss the opportunity to pay attention to what's going on, to see the confinement of pain can be a place of learning and turning and grace. So what about this? What if pain is primarily an invitation to see and act differently? What about moving from questions about why to focus on what we might be about now? Accepting the confinement we're in requires us to allow the pain to break us open. Instead of running from it, allow it to, work in us. To see our part in what is going on, to face the loss, the illness, the abandonment, the disappointment, and the sin. It may be because we've done it. That's what put us there, like Jonah. But it may not have to do with us at all. Sometimes this confinement has nothing of our doing. So to go to this place is to say that we're related to all humanity. All of humanity sins, and all of humanity is wounded. When we're in these places, we're with people. It's not that we're worse or better than somebody. It's not that we're there's something wrong with us, deeply wrong or bad about us. It's that we're part of the human race. It's that we all sin and fall short, and we all are wounded. So to go there is not an angry resignation of defeat, but a deep acceptance and surrender to what we are given so that we can learn, regardless of how painful, unwelcome, how just or unjust. Sometimes those confinements are totally unjust. So pain and suffering are not exceptions to the human condition. They're not things that, are only some people get. It's part of life. It's inevitable. It arises in 1,000 ways through countless events. But even when we're the cause, as was the case with Jonah, God's intention is not for us to wallow in guilt and shame. If we just stay in the guilt and shame, we're not going to see what God wants to do with us. Or if we stay in our anger, if we stay in our why me? Why is this happening to me? We clench our fists. If we stay in either one of those places, we're not going to get what's possible here. Whatever guilt and shame is present can be a springboard to thinking and acting differently. There's a good guilt also, which is like, I messed this up and I need to do something differently. It can be a springboard for that. God continually desires for us to come to see the light of God's grace, even in our most sinful or our most victimized circumstances. For we all fall short. We perceive that God fills in the blanks. Only God does that. It's another thing we find in the belly of the fish. Only God can fill in those blanks, those needs, those deep needs, those big hungers that we have. Even when we sin over and over again, God's intention is not to judge us or test us. This is what happened to Jonah in the belly of the fish. When Jonah discovered all of that, was working this all through, he goes to prayer. Not surprising. They say that there's no atheists in a foxhole. Heard that phrase? So we would think that Jonah's prayer might be, God, get me out of this. God, save me. I'm at the end of my rope. God, help me. But that is not what Jonah's prayer, he might have said that. It's not recorded. Probably did. But the prayer that we have is a prayer of praise. Praise. Something happened with Jonah in the belly of the whale. Something went on. Not a lament. His prayer was kicked off by his plight, but it was not reduced by it. So he prayed, I called to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and thou didst hear my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the sea, and the flood was all around me, yet you did bring my life up out of the pit. You brought me out of the pit. The Lord my God, when my soul fainted, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. With a voice of thanksgiving, I will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. That's Jonah and the whale. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. He's not delivered yet. And yet he already is, right? He's already experiencing the grace of God's presence in the midst of the dark, confined place that he was in. That's what can happen. You know, sometimes the people that are the most sick, the people that I've seen that have been, at death's door are the most joyful. Have you ever noticed that? It gets you. Because they've had this time in confinement in the belly of the fish, and they've seen that it's not all that. There's more happening here. But we seldom go freely into the belly of the fish. As a culture, we do whatever we can to stay strong and in control, and we think free. In fact, so much of what happens around us is to keep us from that. Take this, try this, take a pill, take a vacation, go do something, buy a new car, whatever it is, it's going to keep us from there. Not that any of those things are, I don't want to put anything about those experiences, but it's that we don't want to go here. We would rather try to fix something, flick a switch, do something, that we can do quickly and easily. The quicker the better. But, fixing something doesn't transform. We try to change events to avoid changing ourselves. We'll benefit spiritually when we accept the confinement that goes on, that's thrust on us, that happens to us, that we put ourselves into sometimes, to look to see what that experience can tell us. Gerald May was a spiritual director, a pastor, writer, and a therapist. And he wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And in it, he conjectures this. Perhaps many of the troubles we experience collectively are really manifestations of a communal dark night of the soul. If so, then some of the turmoil we experience in marriages, families, organizations, or cultures might not be due to something gone terribly wrong. It might be a sign of something going exquisitely right, of divine action carrying us darkly through spaces where we would not and could not go on our own toward a place of greater freedom and love. Are we in such a time today? Are we being led into our communal rooms there to be in the dark without the ability to control or do anything about it? Fighting all the way, battling, blaming, trying to do everything we can not to go there. I wonder if there's a growing hunger to live and engage with each other in ways that are different, as we did here on Monday. You didn't experience that on Monday here. And we experienced a coming together. Not that the pain isn't in the divisions, all the divisions we know. All the places we're hurting and breaking down. Didn't experience that on Monday. Gerald May goes on to say this: when people long for sheer love and bare compassion, when they yearn for simplicity of being and naturalness of peace, when they die inside from the simple desire for liberty and justice, maybe that might become manifest in their relationships, in the groups they form, and maybe, just maybe, that might be the sign that we are moving through the dark night. As a culture, we've been experiencing life inside the big fish's belly. Churches are experiencing this. A lot of our families experiencing this. What are we going to do about it? Time to explore boldly what it might mean to be the people of God today, to be a Christian today, to be a follower of Jesus today. Time of cultural confinement can be the impetus to see and think and act differently. Being boxed in is not a judgment or test, even though it feels like it. It's not the purpose of it. It's an invitation to accept our situation and whatever goes with it and seek God's help, grace, and strength to pray, think, and act in different ways in our individual lives as well as our life together. Are you in that place of confinement today? You may be. Don't despair. It may actually be a gift that you're being given, an opportunity to wrestle, to be in that spiritual gymnasium. Will you take the time to think, reflect, pray, and discern how this situation might be inviting you to think and act differently? Now, it's no accident we hear this 3 days. He was in the belly of the fish 3 days. 3 days speaks right to Jesus, doesn't it? There was death in Jesus that was going into the belly of the whale. Suffering, death, ending, as confined as you can be. But that's not the last word. It wasn't the last word for Jesus. It's not the last word for Jonah either. But it's an essential part of it. To go there, to that place, allows something new to happen, something new to come about, something new in us to come about, something new in us to change. Our God is not a God of death and endings. Our God is a God of life and hope, freedom from whatever ensnares us, hope that never gives out, resurrection, life out of death. Let us pray. God, you are amazing in that you come to us in ways that are maybe not the way we would if we were you. And yet you always see more in us. You see something in us. Because as our Creator, you know what's in us. You don't need to test us to know that. You don't need to judge us to get that. But you love us so much that you're giving us even these times, as important times, as critical, crucial times for us, to come closer to what it means to be your person, your people, to grow in ways that maybe we haven't before, to see you in all of life, all of it, and not just some of it, to understand a little bit more about what it is you're calling us to be and do. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.